In business today, it's all about the action plan. What steps can we take to get to where we want to be? Well, my guest today is author Doug Brown, and he's here to talk about Let It Simmer, a new way to approach business. Doug, thanks for being here.
Well, it's a great pleasure.
So you've written a book, Let It Simmer, as it relates to business. What do you mean by that?
The main reason behind the metaphor is if you try to do something too quickly, if you're cooking, for example, all you're going to do is burn it. If you don't give it enough temperature, it's just going to sit there. So the challenge is take it easy, let all the ingredients kind of mix together the way they're supposed to, and take your time with it without pushing it too fast, too far.
So what's going on in a lot of businesses that you see?
What happens is when you want to make a change, people think they're brought in to make a change, and so they come in and they start trying to do that. They may even have the illusion that somebody's hired them for that purpose. But what happens is an organization is designed to not have changes. It's designed to figure out how to do things and keep doing them the same way so they get the same result. And the people in them are much the same way. People don't want to be changed. They accept change all the time, but they don't want to be changed. So what the Simmer system is about is trying to balance out, I got to make progress with the fact that if you try and push it, you're just going to get pushed back and nothing will happen.
So inside an organization or any business culture, there's always a little bit of a push between wanting to change things so that things can be better and deciding what is already good enough. How does a business make those choices?
Strategically, a business needs to figure out what's happening around it, what's going to go on. Part of the Simmer system, one of the most important things, obviously, is you have to be either making the case very effectively from the top level down that, guys, this is really important. The company's going to go out of business if we don't do this. The organization has to change for whatever reasons. And that's actually one of the reasons that business is faster at making change than, say, government agencies, because they don't actually have to do anything. And what the Simmer book is about is those situations which are more common than you would think, where the top-down doesn't really have that message. They don't have to change. But you come in and for whatever professional reason, for business purposes, you think you need to make a change. Now you're going to have to convince people to do it in a way that you can't order them because they're not going to do it. Even if you think you have the position and you order them, they're still not going to do it. So how can I capitalize on the things that they're doing anyway, the things that they would do if the restraints were taken off of them, and try and work collaboratively with people to start doing the thing that you would have told them to do anyway.
So when we talk about change inside an organization, what types of change are positive and what types of change might be negative?
From the person who's being changed, and I use that in the object sense, so I'm doing my business and somebody's trying to change me, almost any change is considered negative. They don't necessarily think of it that way, but they've got something that's working for them. And you have to remember within a business that it's an organization. It's made up of people. You know, we talk about businesses as they're some sort of neutral entity, but they're not. They're made up of lots of people. The people who are managing the business from the middle level on up got to their position by doing what they're doing now. So now I'm asking them to change. So either they're thinking, you're asking me to stop doing the stuff that has been successful, why would I do that? Or in many cases, they're astute enough to see that the change you're proposing, for example, let's say you want to bring in more transparency, more collaborativeness instead of one-person decision-making, that's taken away a lot of their prerogatives to do whatever they want. So naturally, they're not really going to want to do that. So it really doesn't matter whether the change from the outside would appear to be something that's good or not good. From the seat of the person who's being changed, it's all not good.
Doug, how do you get buy-in from employees who don't want to do change?
I would say that the best way to do that is to let them discover by themselves. If you're looking at the company from inside out, so you're an insider trying to make a change, you have to make a case for why they need to change what they're doing. Sometimes it's an indirect change, so we are providing a means for making things better, better processes, better something which they will participate in, as opposed to them being told you need to stop doing what you're doing and do this other thing. From the outside, if you're being brought in, for example, as a consultant or some other professional that's asked to help with this, it's much more difficult because you're trying to impose a structure which is based on your professional knowledge, your experience, maybe even your experience observing other people doing the same thing, but it's not their thing. So you don't really have the platform with which to do that other than just an air of authority. So the most important thing, first of all, for the company to decide, or the organization to decide, why are we doing this? What is so important that everybody needs to do this, and get that message out and be convincing about it and live the message. So many times you see walking the walk, it doesn't happen. So talk the talk goes on, but there's no walk. And the executives will say, well, we want more transparency, but you can't come to the meeting. We want more accountability, but don't worry about that little slush fund I've got over there. People take that cue. They don't hear the words, they see the action, and they do that. What I find with the Simmer system is most of the time what really happens is I get asked, for example, to consultant to come in and help me do a project management office, help me do a better contracting system, something that's not working. So give me this methodology, and it'll be in the contract. You need to do this methodology. It just doesn't happen that way, because most of those things are fairly well known. Most business transactions, other than super high tech, how to actually do the work, but all of the background part about getting the work done, getting people paid, getting businesses running, the advertising, the marketing, all this kind of, it's been around forever. The best practices are well known. The organization's not doing it because they have some other reason for not wanting to do that. And I don't say not wanting meaning the employee comes to work, so I'm not going to do that. But instead they, well, why should I stretch the extra mile to do this thing, which I know isn't going to work anyway? So you have to find ways of getting them to move in the direction of what needs to be done by helping themselves out. So with project management, for example, very often the biggest frustration people have is they can't manage their time because somebody else in the company is going to give them something. When? I don't know, I'll get to it. Well, that's not very helpful. I don't have to create a very big management structure to simply say, well, why don't you guys sort of agree on, at least give me a lead ahead that, okay, I'll have this thing done for you in 2 or 3 weeks. And whenever that is, I'll be accountable for that decision. Not to the big corporation, not to a big dashboard or a chart on the wall, but just me and you. I agree that I'm going to do this thing for you next week. If you start doing that kind of thing, nobody objects to it too much, and it moves the ball in the right direction. Now people get in their head, okay, when I'm asked to do something, I kind of need to do it. And that's the mindset that in many cases doesn't really exist in these companies that are resistant to processes.
In your book, Let It Simmer, what does that look like in a business, to let it simmer?
Hopefully it doesn't really look like anything. And, other than the connotations, you might call it, guerrilla marketing or something like that. Guerrilla with a U, not with a O. The idea behind it is, again, you're not going to impose a framework. Now, you personally understand what the framework is because you've lived it before, you're professionally trained in it, but you're not going to tell people, oh, we're going to adopt the so-and-so system for reinventing, the so-and-so system for program management. Instead, you work out, okay, what is it that's not happening here? How can I get people to do that? So inside, you're working with the peer managers who are hopefully having a problem. If nobody's having a problem, there's nothing for you to solve. You're just being asked to impose a framework for a problem that doesn't exist. That's never going to work, although you see it happening all the time. Millions of dollars in consulting fees go in this exact direction. But when you get there and there is a problem, people are frustrated because their work is disorganized, because they don't know what's happening day to day, because it takes their purchasing shop 6 months to do something that can be done in a couple of days, those kind of problems. People do actually want help with that. So you have to go in at what is the symptom without letting them worry too much about the root cause behind the symptom. Okay, if I can help you guys work together to solve this little piece of the problem, and then you pick another little piece of the problem. You do those kind of things. It has two advantages. One is things are getting better, and fairly quickly, every week, 2 weeks, every month, people can actually see that these little niggling, annoying things are going away. That's nice. They like that. Now you can come back for the thing that maybe they wouldn't have done on their own, but now they've got confidence in you that, you know, when we do these things, it seems to work. So maybe we'll give you a little leeway to try this other thing. The other thing is, because it's not your thing, but it's their idea, when you leave, and eventually everybody does, whether you're a consultant, you're an employee, you move on, you get promoted, something, it stays on. And for me, the best consulting engagements have always been the ones where 2, 3, 4 years later, you go back, you visit, you talk to people, and they're still doing 80% of what you helped put in place.
So why did you write the book, Let It Simmer?
It had a long gestation period, and I won't go into all of that. When I first started, actually, I was studying for a program management certification, and I looked at the book and said, this doesn't make sense. It may be that it works for the exam, but none of this is what I'm really doing in the real world. And I spent a couple of 3 years after that just kind of going through what I was doing for consulting without worrying about the book too much. I thought, you know, we need to have a book that talks about what people actually do. After a while, I worked out what happens with, there's lots of books. Let It Simmer is just one of probably 100 and something books on the topics of program management, project management. But what they all talk about is best practices. So best practices, if I'm an Olympic track star, I have certain things that I do. I have certain shoes that I buy, of $500 track shoes or something like that. If I'm a little kid who's still learning how to run around the track, I don't need $500 track shoes. I just need to know how to put my feet in front of each other without falling over. That's really what I do, is I help people get in a position where they're now able to start talking about best practices, because if you start off in that direction from the beginning, you're just going to hurt yourself.
So inside the book, Let It Simmer, you share some examples of companies that you've worked with. Would you like to share some of those here?
Well, yeah, without naming any names, because I'm sure that. So there was one company that I use as a very good example, which was always astonishing to me. Was a small startup, and I don't go into this much detail in the book because I was trying not to make it too obvious. But this was a good example. Had invented a product which is of interest to all women. It was a means of doing mammograms with lasers instead of the roller thing. So obviously that was a pretty interesting project. They had completed the research, and they were going into the phase where they were going to now get it qualified as a market product, which is enormous amounts of regulation. They had recognized that they had to change from being these crazy scientists behind a bench who were just trying to prove something to actually satisfying all these regulatory requirements. They were doing all the paperwork and they're doing all the tests. So they really embraced this, and they took on enormous amounts of rigidity and process that most customers would have rejected right away. And they actually hired us to help them do that and to find out how best practices were. That was sort of illuminating, because these guys actually spent a third of their budget one year to have us help them do that. But it set them on the road to going down 5 or 6 years down the road. This thing actually went on the market, which was quite quick by that standard. Contrast. I've been involved in several situations where external auditors will say, well, you know, we're going to shut you down unless you do this process. Your books are a mess, you know, for government agencies. We're going to take away your money unless you do this. So they have hired me and my company to help them, quote, to do this, whatever this framework is that they're not doing. If there's no real incentive for the individuals to change, nothing much happens. So we had, for example, situations where at the top level, executives would say, I want this changed. I don't care who you have to upset. We need to change it. We need to change it now. I have learned over time that that's actually a red flag. You have the executive support for that moment, and you might be able to push some stuff through. But in all three of the cases I can think of like that, within 9 months, the executive had moved on to some other greener pastures. And there you are, having annoyed half the people. Now you've got to either start over again, or you're stuck, and you pretty much have to crawl back in your hole for a while until you can rebuild all of these relationships that you've stepped on. And this happens a lot, and people are certainly entitled to ask, so is this just a thrill of the month, or is there a reason why I have to totally disrupt what I'm doing.
So it sounds like relationships are really a critical component in any kind of organizational change.
Oh, it is, absolutely. We do tend to forget about that sometimes, especially with professional frameworks. You know, we think about, well, this is the right way to do something. You move this box to that box. You fill out this form. You have this workflow. But it's all about the people. We tend to think of corporations as, you know, that corporation and it's a logo on the screen, but it's not. It's made up of people. And you look, I think we can all say, you know, it's no big secret that Detroit was a nightmare for years. Why? Because the people didn't have any real incentive to change. The fact that the business was losing money, all of those businesses were losing money by the billions. The executives in there weren't really affected by that. So they didn't really change, even though it was obvious that probably would be a good idea to do so. But it wasn't a good idea for them personally. So yeah, it's always about the people. And even, say, the Project Management Institute is a very large organization, hundreds of thousands of certified professionals, has, over the last 5 or 6 years, started to add to all of its tools and templates. A big component of their certification process now is, and people skills.
So tell me a little bit about yourself personally.
I've always worked with organizations, within organizations. I started out as an Army officer. I had wonderful assignments there. Went to Panama, went to Hawaii, I went to Germany. And actually those were unknown to me at the time, although they're wonderful travel experiences. I got to spend quite a bit of time in those countries, sometimes doing things that didn't require me to wear a uniform, not sneaky Pete stuff. I just got to spend a lot of time with the local folks in different assignments. So that was great. But one of the things that always happened to me in the Army is I always got to an assignment and the person would leave and I would fill in for them and they would go off with the band and the fanfare and the medals, and then my boss would pull me and say, okay, now this is a mess and you've got 6 months to fix it up. So why don't you get Medal Boy back here and have him fix the mess instead of me? But it's that way a lot. Organizations have the illusion of success because it's better that way. So maybe it was a natural, if accidental, segue that when I came out of the Army, I started doing management consulting work, and it was a very grandiose title back then. We were working for management consulting companies, but it was more or less the same things that needed to be done that everybody kind of knew how to do, but they didn't really do it, and you had to work with them to get stuff done, and either you would do it for them and then they would sign it and say it was theirs, which was fine. They were paying us to do that. Or we would actually have to work with them to get them to start doing things that needed to be done, but nothing would happen if they didn't get done from their point of view. So it was always like that for years and years. After about 10 years of that, 15, I was offered the opportunity to join the federal government as a senior level manager. And I thought, well, this is great. I want to know why they spend all this money on all these consulting services and then they don't do the thing that we just charge them $1 million to tell them to do, and then they don't do it. What's that? So after the consultants leave the room, what happens back there on the government side as to why they don't do this? So I went over to become a government program management office head. I was given the opportunity to start one up from scratch with people, funds, and so on. And I learned from that quite a bit about, well, the reason why they don't do that is because they don't really have any incentive to do it. Now, this science has been around for 6,000 or 7,000 years, so it's not like nobody knows how. But they have other incentives. I took that organization to a point where it was actually fairly stable and able to do program management, to do planning, to do budgeting, to actually buy things in the right manner, in the right time. And I went to a different government agency that needed to do the same thing. And then I came back to the consulting world to continue to do more of the same.
If you could give advice to an organization that sees a need for change, what would you say to them?
Well, sees the need is the big thing, right? There are two ways to look at that. The organization sees a need to change because why? Because there's a big strategic driver behind it. I'm in the buggy whip manufacturing business, and this guy, Henry Ford, is now changing my world, and I need to do something. And everybody here needs to do something, otherwise the factory is going to close. That's a pretty easy case. Quite often the change is because an executive comes in either in their mind or in the shareholder's mind or somebody's mind, they need to do a particular thing. That's a harder sell, and that's where we go back to the simmer system. Is okay, that's what you want to happen, but when you order them, so I use in my book a quote from Harry Truman, actually, who's from right here locally, pretty much, right across the state, where he's talking about Eisenhower got elected. He says, "Poor Ike. He's going to go up there to Washington and say, do this, do that, and nothing will happen." That's going to be very frustrating for him. And large government organizations, large companies are much like that. If you have to do a change within an organization that people just, it's driving them crazy, they have to do things, the things that are driving them crazy are not going to change because the leadership is going to make them change, because the leadership's very comfortable with the way it is. That's how they got there. So you have to start from the grassroots and do the simmering thing, get together in small groups, make things happen locally within the groups. Hey, I'll work with you, you work with me. We need this little process put together so we can do things together. If that's working, maybe another group in the organization will look, oh, what those guys are doing, let's do that. And then the next thing you know, you have a process going on the shop floor that nobody asked anybody to do. They just did it. Those are the changes that actually stick.
Doug Brown, author of Let It Simmer, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.